One of the most powerful and useful concepts to understand is that of heaven and earth. This sort of primal truth that the universe derives from the interplay of two forces, two counteracting forces. And this is a concept that is has emerged independently from various different cultures, and that points you to a certain truth in it, and that many different peoples over long periods of time essentially developed the same concept, and there are variations on it or whatever, like in like the popular yin and yang, which sort of attributes all to a mix of masculine and feminine energy. But same concept essentially. There is this in that, and that in this. Everything is a mixture of these things, and sort of like on this spectrum between these 2 points. You get complexity when you have 2 points. And so a single point provides us the complexity, but we can make a line with 2 points, and on that line we can further plot other points. Without that line, without those 2 points, those two counteracting points, we don't have complexity. And that's important to understanding perhaps where the origins of whatever this universe is and how it works. Um, and so why does that matter though, like, to us? Because that's a founding principle of the universe. Therefore, it exists in everything, um, from the rocks, geology, solar system, to politics, to emotions. We find evidence of this primal truth. So heaven represents the sort of the intuitive, the world beyond physical beyond our sensory perception, or our normative sensory perception. And so Earth, of course, represents the world of hunger, the world of pain, that being that which is closely associated with our senses, our bodies, and the world in which we physically will die. The drives associated with physical survival, um, the need to eat, uh, and sort of everything that is downstream of that, and all the extremes of that, um, which might include taking from other people, or just like selling people things, or growing things, or whatever, whatever physical growth and survival in the world. And so there's obvious negative ramifications of that, negative extremes. Um, and then, so on the other end of the spectrum, the drive of like living for trying to extract oneself from the world, or like the drive to live in a world beyond that of hunger, um, which is necessary as well, but taken to the extreme, then the body will wither and die, because we're not feeding it, not paying attention to it. Um, but in moderation, that looks like being nice to each other, and observing our sort of spiritual needs, and our need for peace, and things like that. Things that might seem to just a sort of rational thought at odds with our need to, like, compete and survive in the world, in a world that's dangerous, and it has many other competitors. We've all heard this cliche that there's no light without darkness, and that's true. That nothing exists without a contrast. The only way we see is through contrast. Um, our vision is based on detecting differences. So we become, there's such a thing as being snowblind, where we become effectively blind because we don't detect the significant changes in visual data. Civilization and like human knowledge, and therefore our development, couldn't exist as it has and as it is, if it were not for the both of the drives. And so everybody can't live as a monk, right? There would be no civilization, because somebody needs to produce the food that the monks have to beg for, so everybody cannot, only a small number of in a society can live a completely spiritual life. So for a society to devote itself entirely to 100% spiritual life, then that society would die, and in antiquity it would be destroyed rather quickly by a society that was not doing that. And conversely, perpetual violence is hard to maintain, because eventually you run out of people to kill, and things to steal, and crops to burn, or whatever. So when you see that more of what you see in history is these extremes of violence, and then it leads to a period of integration, and that's why and then that's what's responsible for basically the ethnic makeup of humanity today, and much of the mixing of much of the mix of genetics and culture that we're accustomed to today, is because peoples were conquered, absorbed, and in some cases killed off entire lines which were sort of deleted from the gene pool, and that affected the overall human genome as well. But it's this sort of intense hyper-violence is not something that can really perpetuate itself for very long. So these extremes are actually part of the fluctuations of the system, part of the universal dialogue, and they're not apart from it, and they're not aberrations. It's simply, it's like the universe talking into itself. So Genghis Khan was not apart from the universal system. It was a part of it. He was a part of it. The Mongolian Empire was a part of it, and in other instances of extreme violence and occupation and absorption, and that was all part of human development. And it's not good. It just is, of human moral development. This continuum of human moral development that we can see ourselves in. And so we can see the obvious danger in identifying either end of the spectrum as being a good. And so that leading to imbalance. And we should all agree that our goal should be balance. And we can very easily judge anything by by its association with balance. How balanced is something that we do? How balanced is my opinion? How balanced are my actions? This is a very easy way to judge things, and a very good way to guide our actions as an individual or state or anything. And this is referred to as being the middle path. The middle path is what points us to perpetual rebirth. And that's what we want. So an imbalance leads to death. Death of the individual, death of the society, death, the lack of rebirth. Should be what we're all pointed at. And this is essentially what, Jesus or any other great prophet was talking about. Not, he wasn't talking about a heaven in time that you go to after you die. He was talking about being reborn eternally, and in bringing your actions in line with the universe, which is a unique capability that humanity has. We can stop living entirely as animals, and we can live in line with the universe. And that will of the universe, think about why should you want to defy it? And who are you to think that you can defy the way that the universe works? What folly is that? And that way of the universe, if you want to use the word God, that's what it is. That's what everybody was always talking about. That's God. And you don't need to call it God. I don't really call it God. But it is. It is that which is. And so, regardless of whether you're Muslim or Christian or whatever, it doesn't conflict. Nothing conflicts with that. With living in line with the will of the universe, which you can just call the will of God. Living in balance, the middle way. It might conflict with particular aspects of organized religion, but those are all institutions which are stuck in time, which are not concerned with the eternal. They're concerned with the world of earthly time. They're concerned with punishing you infinitely for finite transgressions. So the goal is not to completely destroy the ego, right? And obviously the goal is not to completely ignore the spiritual, because that's a lot of what has been done, and a lot of what drives the nation state, right? Is manipulating the will of people into driving these egoic pursuits. And again, we should see this all as not like going the wrong way necessarily, but as an extreme of this, an extreme oscillation in the sort of moral path of the universe, moral path of humanity, and that oscillation, the extinctions, the many extinctions that have happened on Earth. It's all a part of the cycle. It's all a part of the universe. In that way, it is right. It is. Now, the things are not morally right. And also, mind you, that our opposing the bad things is part of it too. That is part of the universe, God's will, whatever. Yes, we must ourselves become agents of change. That is not pointless, and that doesn't change, with this view of the universe. But we can see that as also being part of the system of change. So this dynamic is reflected in everything from the individual to like the nation state to all of humanity, and and so we see when a person sort of adopts the religion of ego, and we often, one export of that is like we get this sort of hustle bro culture, tech bro kind of those kinds of things, where people are really internalizing the values of the ego as like the highest values, the highest pursuits. And we have a few individuals like that, then okay, whatever. But everybody will probably be fine, and they'll probably, as long as they're not hurting people too much, it might not be that bad. But when you have like a whole significant percentage of society who are behaving like that, then you get stuff like the housing market that we have, and you get these values that are taught in schools, taught to business school students. They're not teaching them. Most schools are not teaching the like sustainable economics and things like that. Those kind of courses have come around, but they're by and large, that's not why people are going to business school. Those aren't the kind of businesses that people want to run. People want to make businesses to make money, and that's pretty much it, which is pretty easy to gauge as an entirely egocentric pursuit. And we have these sort of like pro-social justifications for that, but and some people do, like, honestly, like want to make a good business that's fair to its employees and represents a social good and everything like that, and that kind of thing can happen. But of course, it's like there's the broader criticism of capitalism, and that that's not what it's built to do, right? Nevertheless, some good things happen, but that's not a justification for a bad system that has a bad purpose. And that might be a reality that like a lot of people don't want to hear, is that like capitalism has been good at feeding people, and we have to understand that like humanity comes from a place of intense scarcity, and so part of why I can even we can even talk about stuff like this is because of like because of being like poor educated person, relatively poor educated person, which would not have been something that would have really existed in the pre-industrial world. And like those of us who are not of great means, in a pre-industrial society, we wouldn't be educated. Our teeth would be falling out and all this stuff. So that doesn't make capitalism or industrialization good, or that there was not a better way or something like that. It was just simply that's that's the way things were going to happen. And that doesn't mean we have to accept capitalism and all the bad stuff, or that we don't want to ever change it. It's just understand human history, and that it was never going to be bloodless, and that it is a struggle between these different drives that that exist in the nation state, that exist in the person. And so unfortunately you can see it's like the extreme of those drives, uh, the extreme of the let's say earthly drives. We get the United States and its disastrous record of foreign policy, and we get Israel, the murderous vassal state, colonial project, and we get, of course, a guy like Donald Trump becoming president, and trying to stay president. This is, if that seems egoic, it's because it is. That's exactly what the ego drive will deliver. It will deliver these extremes. In that context, America makes perfect sense, what we are. And that doesn't mean it has to be this way forever. We can take this as an oscillation that might seem eternal to us right now. But it doesn't mean things can't change drastically, and they will change drastically. We don't know how, really, but that's is a certainty that things will change, and what we understand as like sort of elemental to our existence will cease to be, or will transform into something else, as has happened, countless times. We transform that is through personal action, and is through guidance by embracing the middle way. And just because you're a leftist doesn't mean you're on the middle way. That's not how it works. There are plenty of leftists who engage in leftism in an egocentric way, and for the ends of ego, or in just a completely intellectual way. And the way that I came to being a leftist was entirely intellectual, because it makes practical sense. It's pragmatic. It's actually, when you look at conservatism, it's not pragmatic at all. If you learn a few things, you understand it doesn't make sense. It's not consistent. It's emotional. Where if you look at the world in a completely dispassionate way, leftism makes sense, because it's encouraging systems that perpetuate themselves. So intellectually, that is the middle way. But we have to understand that there's a spiritual side to life, and that we need to have spiritual and intellectual balance. That doesn't mean it's wrong to read a bunch of books and learn a bunch of stuff. We need to learn, and we need both the intellect and the spirit and the intuition. So one without the other, and we are led astray. We're led off the path. If we don't know anything, if we don't expand our intellectual capacity, then we're easy to defeat, where we'll find it difficult to defend ourselves. We'll find it difficult to defeat other ideas, to interact with the opposing ideas in the intellectual realm. And if we're too intellectual, then we're not going to achieve unity, because destroying the enemy it's not a possibility. The enemy will never be destroyed. It's just the enemy will fragment into other enemies. As you see U.S. foreign policy in the 20th century, this is what happens. You don't defeat the Soviet Union. You cause the Soviet Union to collapse, and then you get a bunch of destabilized former Soviet republics, and you get a more extreme, more corrupt, more expansionist Russia, that you then have to fight a proxy war with, or, in order to continue trying to destroy. This doesn't end, okay? Like, you cannot destroy your enemy. You must become united with your enemy. Like, we have to all unite. Because we don't have enemies. The enemy is us. Or, we're fighting ourselves, So that kind of rhetoric is defeatist. It will only lead to extinction. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't defend ourselves, physically or intellectually or whatever, or that, we shouldn't be, like, let's say, aggressive about pursuing our own well-being. It's just to say that a sense of balance can be applied to all of these things. If somebody attacks you, should you find it necessary to shoot them, like use lethal force against them? Should you want to? We can decidedly say if you like the idea of, like, taking somebody's life, even someone who like breaks into your house or something, then the spirit of that is lacking in balance. That's not a productive impulse. You shouldn't want to take anyone's life. You should want to defend yourself if you need to defend yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. And it is possible that, in your life you may need to take somebody's life in self-defense. It's possible. It's not likely, but it happens. So it's not a way of complete pacifism. It's merely observing our own physical survival, but also, like, observing spiritual survival of not just ourselves, but us collectively, of everybody, and attempting to live in harmony with the universe and with the rest of with our brothers and sisters. To even maintain anyone as your enemy, then necessarily, like, that is a way of imbalance. And so obviously that leads to destruction, and there will never be a peaceful world in which we see ourselves all as, like, myself and the other. There will never be a peaceful world of others. It must all be us. So the way the United States does everything of like, arming the entire world and putting bases everywhere and developing the latest, greatest weapons. It only perpetuates destruction and conflict. It perpetuates a lack of rebirth. That is not something that will ever correct itself. It can't. It's impossible. if you're falling, you're not all of a sudden going to start going up. You know, you need some means of going up. You need some way to start not falling. And so, going the same way and saying, "Oh, I just need to fall a little more," is not any way to go up. It's only a way to go down. This is being an asshole taken to the level of a nation state, of an empire, of the largest empire ever. And it is exactly what it looks like. We've militarized the entire world, formed the entire world around the safety, around protecting our interests, above the interests of all, above the survival of our species. Even America goes first, right? This will never result in a situation of finding a peace or balance for the environment or for other countries. It can't, because it's going in the opposite direction. And it is something that it's like Israel, this only makes us less safe, because the more you have to protect yourself, the less safe you are. The more enemies you have, the more you have to protect yourself. That's a cycle that perpetuates itself. So the thing about loving everybody and everybody loving you is that nobody wants to hurt you, and you don't want to hurt anybody else. Therefore, you don't need military bases all over the world. And then other countries don't need to militarize in order to deter our aggression, This is the way of separateness. It's a way that does not lead to long-term security. It leads to creating more enemies, more conflicting entities. It's very easy to see how short-sighted it is. And whatever it's doing, it's not doing the will of God, and it's not under this in this kind of system with the United States or anything like it. The people therein the citizens the citizens of the nation are prevented en masse from any kind of unity with God, from achieving the ultimate goal of spiritual oneness with the universe, because of how our society is structured, how our nation persists, and the egocentricity at the core of it all, that puts us all against each other, where because we're all, by design, we're all struggling to fulfill our earthly needs, often at the expense of others, and certainly at the expense of our spiritual lives. If one loves their self more than they love God, then they can never achieve unity with God. They can never fulfill God's will. Impossible. You cannot do that if you love yourself more than you love God. And God is everything. God is the universe. God is all of us. We're all a part of God. So therefore, you must love all above yourself. Love the earth, love the world, love all people above yourself. Okay? There's no other way. There's no other way. And the good thing is, like, despite capitalism and, you know, what the United States has turned the world into, we're taught these principles. You know, much of what our institutions teach us, like public education and whatnot, they don't teach us to be like necessarily bloodthirsty people. In fact, the opposite. You know, they teach us often to be kind, and I mean, it has a lot to do with the individual teachers, for sure. But you know, we're taught to treat each other with respect. We're taught these very Christ-like values, and you know, Jesus was sure onto some things, because it's like, you know, this is all the middle way is what Jesus was describing. You know, he was, and what he represents, a spiritually perfect man living on earth and not denying the earth and accepting the earth, accepting his physical death, and knowing that his essence was eternal, you know, that his body would die, accepting that and knowing that his essence would live on and be eternal, you know. And so if we all embrace that, you know, all that stuff, all that good stuff about loving each other as we love ourselves, more than we love ourselves even, and then that creates a perpetual system of kindness, where we create heaven on earth. Really, that's what heaven is.